first time I asked for a break, I was standing over a wash tub with a crying baby in my arms. My daughter was only 3 months old. My son had just turned 2, and I had not slept through a single night in almost 3 years. The morning had started before sunrise. Actually, most mornings did. The baby woke shortly after 4. By the time I settled her again, my son was awake. Then came breakfast, then laundry, then feeding chickens, then cleaning, then cooking, then more laundry, then comforting one child while carrying the other. By noon, I already felt exhausted. Not ordinary tired, not the kind of tired a nap could fix. The kind that settles deep inside your bones. The kind that makes even simple tasks feel impossible. I was 22 years old, and some days I felt twice that age. Outside our farmhouse, spring had finally arrived. The fields were turning green again. Birds sang from fence posts. The air smelled fresh and clean. Everyone around me seemed excited about the new season. Everyone except me, because while the world felt alive again, I felt like I was disappearing. Little by little, my husband Samuel never noticed. Or maybe he noticed and simply believed it was normal. To understand Samuel, you have to understand the family he came from. His father was one of the most respected men in our church district, a man known for discipline, obedience, faithfulness, hard work. People often praised him. Young men looked up to him. Parents pointed to him as an example. And Samuel had spent his entire life trying to become exactly like him. The problem was that not everything passed from father to son should be copied. Samuel believed deeply in duty. Duty to God, duty to family, duty to church, duty to work. There was nothing wrong with that. The problem was that he often treated human limits as weaknesses, especially when those limits belonged to someone else. Like me, when our first child was born, everyone celebrated. Family members visited. Neighbors brought food. Church friends offered help. For a while I felt supported, loved, seen. Then life slowly returned to normal, or at least normal for everyone else. For me, everything had changed. My days no longer belonged to me. Every hour revolved around feeding, cleaning, comforting, and caring for another human being. Then, before I had fully recovered, I became pregnant again. People smiled when they heard the news. Another blessing, another gift from God. That was what everyone said, and I believed it. I truly did. But blessings can still be difficult, and nobody seemed willing to admit that. Not openly, not in church, not at family gatherings, not around other mothers. Whenever women spoke about motherhood, they usually focused on gratitude, on joy, on blessings. Rarely exhaustion, rarely loneliness, rarely fear. Yet those feelings existed, even if nobody talked about them. After my daughter arrived, life became overwhelming. The baby needed constant attention. My toddler wanted his mother every moment. The house still needed cleaning. Meals still needed preparing. Laundry seemed endless. Every day felt like a race I could never win. I remember one particular afternoon. The baby was crying. My son was crying. A loaf of bread burned in the oven, and I suddenly started crying too. Right there in the kitchen. 3 voices, 3 different reasons. One small farmhouse filled with tears. I sat on the floor holding both children, and for the first time in my life, I felt trapped. Not by my family, not by my marriage, by exhaustion itself. The feeling frightened me, because Amish women are supposed to be strong, patient, capable, steady. At least that was what I had always been taught. Yet there I was, barely holding myself together. That evening Samuel came home from the fields. The children had finally settled down. Supper was late, the house looked messy, and I looked even worse. He immediately noticed. What happened here? The question was not cruel, just confused, as if chaos itself surprised him. I stared at the table, then quietly answered, "It was a difficult day." Samuel nodded. "We all have difficult days." There it was again, that phrase, simple, dismissive, final. We all have difficult days. Maybe he believed those words were comforting. Maybe he believed they would make me stronger. Instead, they made me feel invisible. Because what I needed was not a reminder that life was hard. I already knew that. I lived it every day. What I needed was understanding. Weeks passed. Nothing improved. If anything, things became harder. The baby entered a stage where she woke several times each night. My son became more demanding. Summer approached. Farm work increased. Samuel spent longer hours away from home. I spent longer hours trying to hold everything together. Some evenings I could barely keep my eyes open during supper. Other evenings I forgot simple things. Once I nearly left a kettle boiling dry. Another time I accidentally put salt into a recipe twice. Mistakes became common. Not because I was careless, because I was exhausted. One night, after putting both children to bed, I sat alone at the kitchen table. The oil lamp flickered softly. The house was finally quiet. For the first time all day, I rested my head against my hands, and suddenly realized something. I could not remember the last time I had been alone, truly alone, even for 10 minutes. The thought made my chest tighten. I loved my children, more than anything. But love does not erase exhaustion. Love does not remove limits. Love does not replace rest. That realization stayed with me for several days. Then one evening, after another endless day, I finally gathered enough courage to speak. Samuel was reading scripture at the table. The children were asleep upstairs. The house was quiet. My hands trembled slightly, not from fear, from desperation. Samuel? He looked up. Yes? I swallowed hard. I need a break. The words sounded strange coming out loud, almost selfish, almost forbidden, yet also honest, painfully honest. For a moment, Samuel simply stared at me. Then his expression changed. Not anger, not concern, disappointment. The kind that sinks slowly into a room, heavy and uncomfortable. He closed his Bible carefully, folded his hands, and said something that would stay with me for years. A mother asking for less responsibility is dangerous. I felt my stomach drop, but he was not finished. His voice remained calm, steady, certain. Asking for relief from God-given duties can become a sin if we are not careful. The room fell silent. I stared at him, unable to believe what I had just heard, because in that moment, I realized something frightening. The person who should have understood my exhaustion the most believed my need for rest was a spiritual failure, and deep down I knew our biggest struggle had only just begun. For 2 days after Samuel said those words, I barely spoke. Not because I had nothing to say, because I had too much. Every time I looked at him, the same sentence returned to my mind. Asking for relief can become a sin. I carried those words through every chore, while washing diapers, while sweeping the floor, while nursing the baby, while rocking my son after he woke crying from a bad dream. Those words followed me like a shadow, and the worst part was this: I started to believe them. Maybe I was selfish. Maybe I was weak. Maybe other Amish mothers handled 2 children better than I did. Maybe a stronger woman would smile through exhaustion and never ask for anything. That was how guilt works. It takes one person's harsh words and plants them deep inside your heart. Then it waits for you to water them with shame. The next Sunday, church service was held at Samuel's uncle's farm. The weather was warm, buggies lined the lane, children ran barefoot near the fence. Women carried food into the house. Men gathered near the barn. Everything felt ordinary, but inside me nothing felt ordinary anymore. I sat with the women during service, holding my daughter against my chest. My son sat beside my mother. Every time the baby stirred, I stiffened. Every little sound felt like proof that I was failing. After worship, while the meal was being prepared, I stepped outside for fresh air. I stood behind the wash line near a row of lilac bushes. For a few moments, nobody needed me. Nobody touched my dress. Nobody cried. Nobody called my name. Just breathing felt like a gift. Then I heard someone behind me. Mary. It was my Aunt Lydia. She was my mother's younger sister, a quiet woman with tired eyes and a soft voice. She had 7 children and never spoke more than necessary. I quickly wiped my face. I am fine. She looked at me for a long moment, then said gently, I did not ask. Those 3 words nearly broke me, because they told me she already knew. Aunt Lydia stepped closer and stood beside me. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then she looked toward the farmhouse and said, When my fourth baby was born, I thought I was losing my mind. I turned to her, shocked. She did not look ashamed. I would sit in the pantry sometimes just to have 1 minute where nobody touched me. I had never heard an Amish woman say anything like that. Not openly, not calmly, not without apologizing. A strange relief moved through me. I whispered, "You felt that too?" She nodded. "Many women do. Most just never say it." My throat tightened. Samuel says asking for a break is close to sin. Aunt Lydia's face changed. Not dramatically, but enough. Her eyes sharpened. "Rest is not rebellion, Mary." I stared at her. She continued, "Even the animals are given rest after hard work. Even the fields are allowed seasons. Why would a mother be the only part of God's creation expected to never stop?" I had no answer, because I had never thought of it that way. All my life, I had heard about duty, obedience, sacrifice, motherhood, but Aunt Lydia spoke about rest as if it belonged inside faith, not outside it. That conversation became the first small crack in the guilt Samuel had placed on me, not enough to free me, but enough to let in a little light. The days that followed were still difficult. The children still cried, the laundry still piled up. Samuel still worked long hours, but something inside me had changed. I began noticing things I had ignored before. I noticed how often women helped each other quietly. A neighbor taking a baby without being asked. An older girl carrying water for a tired mother. A grandmother rocking a restless child during church. A sister bringing bread at just the right time. None of that was called sin. It was called community. So why was it wrong when I admitted I needed help? One afternoon, my daughter cried for nearly 3 hours. Nothing soothed her, not feeding. The house was hot. The kitchen smelled of sour milk and soap. My head pounded. By the time Samuel came home, I was sitting on the floor with the baby in my lap and my son asleep against my side. I had not finished supper. I had not folded the laundry. I had not even brushed my hair. Samuel stopped in the doorway. His eyes moved across the room. The mess, the cold stove, the laundry basket, then me. I waited for his disappointment. I expected it, prepared for it, but something in me refused to shrink this time. Before he could speak, I said, "I need help tonight." He frowned. "I have been working all day, so have I." The words left my mouth before I could soften them. Samuel stared at me. I almost apologized. Old habits rose quickly, but I stopped myself. "I am not asking you to do everything," I said. "I am asking you to help with your children." His expression hardened. "My work feeds this family, and mine keeps it standing." The room went silent. My own boldness frightened me, but it also strengthened me, because it was true. For the first time, I had said the truth without wrapping it in guilt. Samuel looked away. I could see anger in his jaw, but beneath it there was something else. Confusion. He did not know what to do with a wife who was still respectful, still faithful, still loving her children, but no longer willing to disappear. That night, he took our son outside while I settled the baby. Only for 20 minutes, but those 20 minutes felt like water in the desert. I sat in the quiet kitchen with my eyes closed, no one touching me, no one needing me, no one crying. 20 minutes, that was all. And it proved something I had been too ashamed to believe. I was not asking for too much. I was asking for something human, but change did not come easily. The next morning, Samuel acted distant. He spoke only when necessary. At breakfast, he prayed longer than usual. His words were careful, pointed. He asked God to help us accept our duties with humble hearts. I knew he meant me. The prayer stung, but I did not argue, not then. Later that week, Samuel asked to speak with the bishop after a gathering. When I saw them standing near the barn, my stomach tightened. I knew what he was doing. He wanted guidance, but part of me feared he also wanted confirmation. Confirmation that I was wrong, that my tiredness was selfish, that a mother should keep going without complaint, that a wife should never ask her husband to carry what belonged to her. That evening, Samuel returned home quieter than usual. The children were asleep. I was mending a small shirt by the lamp. He removed his hat and sat across from me. For a long time he said nothing. Then he finally spoke. The bishop said something today. My hands stopped moving. What did he say? Samuel looked uncomfortable. Very uncomfortable. He said a man can misuse scripture when he uses it to make life easier for himself. The needle slipped from my fingers. I looked at Samuel carefully. His face was lowered. He said a husband who calls his wife's exhaustion a sin should first ask whether he has become the reason she is exhausted. For the first time in days, I could not speak. Samuel's voice grew quieter. He also said children are not only a mother's burden. Something in the room changed. Not fully, not suddenly, but noticeably. Samuel looked like a man who had walked into the bishop's presence certain of one answer and come home carrying another. He was not ready to admit everything. Not yet, but certainty had cracked. And sometimes a cracked certainty is where mercy begins. That night, after the lamp was blown out and the house fell quiet, I lay awake beside my sleeping husband. For the first time in a long while, I felt something besides exhaustion. I felt fear, yes, but also hope. A small, fragile hope. Because maybe the problem had never been that I needed a break. Maybe the problem was that Samuel had been taught to fear a woman's limits more than he respected her humanity. And maybe now, he was beginning to see it. The days after Samuel's meeting with the bishop felt strangely different. Not better. Not yet, but different. Like standing outside after a storm and noticing the wind has finally stopped. You are still cold, still wet, still shaken. But something important has changed. Samuel did not suddenly become a different man. He did not come home with a dramatic apology. He did not announce that he had been wrong. That was not his way. In fact, for several days, he barely mentioned the conversation at all. But I started noticing small things, very small things. And sometimes small things tell the truth better than big speeches. One evening, while I was feeding the baby, Samuel quietly picked up our son's toys from the floor. Another morning, he carried a basket of laundry outside before leaving for the fields. A few days later, he took our son with him to check on the animals. Only for an hour, but that hour felt like a gift. The house became silent. No crying, no questions, no little feet following me everywhere. Just silence. I sat in a chair near the kitchen window and drank a cup of tea while it was still hot, the entire cup, without reheating it 3 times. I almost cried. Not because of the tea, because I finally understood how exhausted I had become. When basic peace feels extraordinary, something is wrong. Very wrong. And for the first time I was beginning to admit that truth, not only to Samuel, to myself. Several weeks passed. Summer slowly faded toward autumn. The corn grew taller. The evenings arrived earlier. The children settled into new routines. Life remained busy. Not because there was less work, because I was no longer carrying all of it alone. Still, one important conversation remained unfinished. Both of us knew it. Neither of us wanted it. But eventually it came. It happened after the children had fallen asleep. Samuel and I sat outside on the porch. The sky was dark. Thousands of stars stretched across the countryside. The only sounds came from insects and distant horses shifting in their stalls. For several minutes we sat quietly. Then Samuel finally spoke. "I owe you an apology." The word surprised me, not because he was incapable of apologizing, because he rarely did at first. He stared out into the darkness. I kept thinking about what the bishop said. I remained silent. I was angry when he said it. He laughed softly. A little embarrassed, too. I could understand that. Nobody enjoys hearing difficult truths, especially when those truths expose blind spots. Samuel rubbed his hands together. Then he said something I never expected. "When you asked for a break, I thought you were rejecting your responsibilities." He paused. "Now I realize you were asking for help before you broke." The sentence hit me harder than he realized, because that was exactly what had happened. I had not been asking for freedom from motherhood. I had not been asking to abandon my family. I had simply been desperate. Desperate for rest, desperate for support, desperate for someone to notice I was drowning. And instead, I had been told I was sinning. Tears filled my eyes, not from anger, relief, the relief of finally being understood. Samuel continued. "My mother spoke to me too. That surprised me." "She did," he nodded. Apparently, Ruth had not remained silent after hearing about our struggles. And unlike the bishop, she had been even more direct. Samuel actually smiled while telling me. She said if I ever carried 2 babies, cooked 3 meals, cleaned a house, washed clothes, and slept 3 hours a night, then I could decide whether you needed a break. For the first time in weeks, I laughed. A real laugh. The kind that feels like sunlight after a long winter. Samuel laughed too. Then his expression softened. I have not been fair to you. The words were simple, but they mattered, because true apologies do not require perfect wording. They require honesty. And for the first time, I felt honesty between us. Over the following months, our marriage slowly changed. Not perfectly, not magically, but steadily. Samuel became more involved with the children. He learned bedtime routines, changed diapers, carried babies, rocked crying children, and discovered something mothers have known forever. Children are wonderful. Children are beautiful. Children are also exhausting, sometimes incredibly exhausting. One afternoon, I returned from visiting a neighbor and found Samuel pacing the kitchen with our daughter. She had been crying for nearly an hour. His hair looked disheveled. His shirt was wrinkled. His expression was pure defeat. I tried not to smile. Everything all right? He looked at me with tired eyes, then said, She is stronger than I am. I laughed so hard I nearly had tears. For the first time, he truly understood. Not from scripture, not from advice, not from the bishop, from experience. That understanding changed more than our routines. It changed our respect for each other. And respect is often the foundation that keeps love standing. Years later, when people asked how we survived those difficult early years with young children, I usually smiled and gave a simple answer. We learned to listen, but the real answer was deeper. We learned something many couples never learn. Duty without compassion becomes a burden. Faith without mercy becomes harshness. And love without understanding slowly grows lonely. I was only 22 when I begged for a break after my second baby. At the time, I felt ashamed, weak, selfish, unworthy. But looking back now, I understand something differently. The brave thing was not asking for help. The brave thing was asking even after being told I should not. Because every human being has limits. Every mother has limits. Every father has limits. Even the strongest people eventually need rest. And there is no sin in admitting that. The real danger comes when we convince ourselves that suffering in silence is somehow holy. It is not. God never asked mothers to destroy themselves. God never asked husbands to ignore their wives. And he certainly never intended love to become a test of endurance. Today, when I watch young Amish mothers carrying babies through church gatherings or rocking restless children during long afternoons, I remember that season of my life. And if one of them ever whispers, I am so tired, I never tell her to work harder. I never tell her to pray more. I never tell her she should feel guilty. I simply tell her the truth. I wish someone had told me sooner. You are human. And sometimes those 3 words are exactly what a tired heart needs to hear. Before I continue sharing more stories from my life, I want to thank you for being here. If you enjoy these Amish stories and would like to hear more, please consider subscribing to the channel. Your support truly means a great deal to me. And if this story touched your heart in any way, I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for listening.